The first thing she heard was the turning of the screw, a slow, deliberate twist, metal grinding against metal, and then her own bones answering back, not with a scream, not yet, but with a crack so faint it could have been imagined, except she felt it, deep in her jaw, spreading like a frozen lightning bolt. She tried to speak, but the head crusher allowed no movement. Her chin was locked into a narrow iron bar, her skull trapped beneath a domed metal cap. She could breathe, but only just, enough to know panic, enough to feel the world collapse into a circle of cold steel closing in around her. Above her, the Inquisitor didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply turned the screw again. One measured rotation, one silent demand: confess. The pressure shifted downward. Her teeth began to splinter, breaking inside her jaw. The sound didn't echo, it vibrated inside her skull. She wasn't just hearing the destruction, she was feeling it happen to her from the inside out. Her vision narrowed, her jawbone trembled. Blood pooled beneath her tongue. Each turn of the screw made the device tighten by degrees so small they felt intimate, like fingers closing around her skull 1 inch at a time. This was not execution, not yet. This was persuasion. The Inquisitors called it the question, a neutral word, a bureaucratic word. But for women accused of witchcraft, the question was never a request. It was a sentence. A woman who refused to confess transformed the courtroom into an iron corridor that led directly to this chair, this device, this moment. The head crusher didn't rely on strength. It relied on patience, a slow, unstoppable pressure that broke teeth first, then bone, then the mind. And as the final twist approached, as she felt the skull tighten around her thoughts, she realized the true terror wasn't the pain. It was that she could hear her own head breaking. This was the Inquisition's quietest machine, and its most devastating.
To understand why such a device existed, you must enter a world where fear was policy and belief was weaponized. The Inquisition was not a single event. It was a centuries-long system built on paranoia, theology, and absolute control. But its brutality did not come from chaos. It came from order. Europe in the 15th and 16th centuries was a continent terrified of the unseen. Plague had rewritten the map. Failed harvests devastated entire generations. Political power shifted like unstable earth beneath kingdoms. Into this tension stepped the Church, one of the only institutions with the authority to explain disaster, assign blame, and promise salvation. And nothing unified frightened populations faster than the idea of an enemy hidden among them. Witchcraft offered the perfect solution. It required no evidence, no witnesses, no motive. A woman's independence, her poverty, her beauty, her age, her disagreements with neighbors, any small deviation could be reframed as a sign of satanic influence. But accusations alone weren't the point. Confession was. The Church needed stories of darkness to justify its own power. It needed women to speak the words that the theology demanded. I made a pact. I summoned spirits. I betrayed God. Without confession, the narrative fell apart. So a machinery of coercion was built to ensure the story survived. Not just physical machinery, iron, wood, and screws, but ideological machinery as well. Priests, scribes, and magistrates formed a chain of authority that turned suspicion into doctrine. The head crusher fit into this system perfectly. It was compact, portable, quiet, Unlike the rack or the strappado, it could be used inside offices, libraries, monastic chambers, places where silence and prayer coexisted with cruelty. The psychology was as important as the metal. Inquisitors believed that pain revealed truth. The body, they argued, could not lie when pressed by divine pressure. If a woman confessed under torture, her words were treated not as desperation, but as spiritual proof. And if she died during questioning, it was said her soul had been claimed before it could return to God. Records show that women were disproportionately accused. Most were poor. Most lacked protection. Many had simply inherited herbal knowledge or midwifery skills that male authorities mistrusted. Their supposed crimes grew more elaborate the longer the questioning continued, because the system rewarded confession, not clarity. The head crusher was rarely the first device used. It was a climactic tool, a final tightening after days of sleep deprivation, humiliation, and other tortures. Its purpose wasn't to kill immediately. Its purpose was to erase resistance. Imagine the psychological effect. A woman brought into a chamber, already knowing what had happened to others. The screw placed above her like a divine judgment. A cleric watching closely, waiting for her to break. The silence between each turn more frightening than the pressure itself. This was a time when suffering was theology, when pain became proof, when the destruction of a woman's skull could be recorded as the extraction of truth. And this is why the head crusher mattered. Because it reveals something essential about the Inquisition. It wasn't violence born from chaos. It was violence born from structure, from authority, from belief. And belief, when sharpened into a tool, is often more dangerous than any blade. If you believe history's darkest secrets should be remembered, not buried, subscribe to the archive.
To understand the horror of the head crusher, you must imagine it not as a single object, but as a system of controlled destruction. It began as a deceptively simple machine, a base plate, an iron bar, a domed cap, and a central screw. But this simplicity was the point. It allowed inquisitors to transport it easily, conceal it from the public, and apply it with unnerving precision. The base was made of forged iron or heavy oak reinforced with metal bands. It had to be immovable. Stability ensured that every ounce of force from the screw translated downward into the victim's skull. The lower bar, the chin rest, was narrow, curved, and sharpened by use. It forced the jaw upward at an unnatural angle. Even before the screw was turned, the position alone created strain in the neck, stretching ligaments and tightening the nerves running into the skull. The cap was the true signature of the device, a half dome of thick metal, polished only on the inside where skin would meet steel. This wasn't for comfort, it was to reduce slipping. Friction ensured that as pressure increased, the skull could not shift or absorb force through movement. Every ounce of torque went straight into bone. At the center of that dome sat the screw, a thick, threaded shaft wide enough that even a single rotation translated to immense downward force. Torture manuals of the era mention that screws were designed with steep threading, meaning each turn compressed the skull by several millimeters, a small measurement, but devastating when applied to bone. The executioner held a handle at the top, not a wheel, not a crank, a handle. Something he could grip with one hand, turn with deliberate care, and pause at any moment to observe the victim's reaction. Because this device wasn't about speed, it was about progression.
The first stage was dental destruction. As the screw tightened, the jaw pressed into the bar. Teeth cracked, roots split, fragments drove downward into the gum line. This stage was essential. The sound of teeth breaking often triggered panic faster than pain alone. The second stage targeted the mandible. The jawbone, one of the strongest bones in the body, began to bow inward. It didn't snap cleanly. It fractured, a slow failure of structure. A deep internal cracking felt through the entire skull. Then came the catastrophic stage, cranial compression. Human skulls are strong, but they are not designed for vertical collapse. As the screw advanced, pressure radiated outward. The eye sockets bulged, vision wavered, blood vessels burst behind the eyes, filling the world with red haze. In some recorded cases, the eyes did not immediately eject. They distended slowly, pushed forward by the collapsing bone behind them. Victims often begged long before the final turn, not because of the pain, but because of the sounds. The skull doesn't break cleanly like wood. It groans, it pops, it compresses. Once the cranial vault gave way, consciousness usually evaporated. Not from blood loss, but because the brain was physically pressed downward, losing space to exist. This was the genius of the device from the Inquisitor's perspective. It was compact, silent, lethally efficient, and it delivered 3 layers of torture: psychological, sensory, and structural, without requiring fire or an audience. Every part of its construction had one purpose: to turn the human head into a pressure chamber, a prison collapsing inward, a place where no prayer, no denial, no breath could escape the inevitability of the screw.
Her name was recorded only once: Isabella the Montoya, a village healer accused by a jealous neighbor after a sick child failed to recover. No one asked about her years of tending wounds, delivering infants, or navigating the fragile health of her community. One accusation was enough. The Inquisition arrived at dawn. They always preferred dawn, when the world was quiet, when guilt seemed to cling to the morning air. Isabella was taken from her home before her family could speak. Her hands bound, her eyes covered, her reputation erased in a single afternoon. For 2 days, inquisitors questioned her. She denied everything. She denied making charms, denied speaking with spirits, denied consorting with demons, denied knowing the devil. But they weren't listening for truth. They were listening for cracks. When she refused to break, they brought her to a smaller chamber. Not the great hall where public hearings were held, a private room, quiet, stale air, a single table, a single chair, and the head crusher waiting at the center. Isabella recognized it. Everyone did. Whispers of the device traveled faster than sermons. Mothers warned their daughters about it. Men pretended it didn't exist. But everyone knew the shape. The Inquisitor spoke calmly. He recited prayers as if this ritual were holy, as if salvation depended on confession, as if the machine in front of her were a tool of mercy rather than destruction. They placed her onto the seat, strapped her arms behind the backrest, bound her legs, lowered the metal cap over her skull. When the chin bar touched her jaw, she flinched. The Inquisitor noted it. Fear meant progress. The attendant placed a bowl beneath her chin, not for blood, but for broken teeth. They always planned ahead. The screw tightened for the first time. Not much, just enough for her jaw to feel the first tremor of pressure. Her breath caught. The Inquisitor asked the question, "Do you confess to the workings of the devil?" She answered with the truth. No. Another turn. Her teeth pressed together so hard she felt a sharp spike along the gum line. She tried to remain calm, she tried to breathe evenly, but every breath scraped against the rising panic. Another question. Another denial. Another turn. A crack blossomed through her molars. She didn't scream, she gasped. An involuntary sound, thin and trembling. The Inquisitor leaned closer. They often did. Suffering was a conversation. "Confess," he said softly. Isabella closed her eyes. She thought of her children. She thought of the herbs drying in her kitchen. She thought of the life she had lived without malice or evil. "No," she whispered. The screw turned again. Her jawbone began to bend. The pain radiated through her ears. Her vision pulsed with shadows. She tasted iron. Her heartbeat became erratic, trapped between terror and determination. The pressure moved upward. Her skull tightened around her thoughts. She felt a warmth behind her eyes, vessels swelling, beginning to rupture. Her world became red at the edges. Still, she refused. The Inquisitor sighed, not in frustration, but in routine. He motioned to the executioner. One final turn. The skull compressed, her spine arched, her eyes surged forward, the world became silent, then white, then nothing. Isabella never confessed, but her silence was written into the record as guilt.
The head crusher did not survive as a museum artifact in most places. Many were melted down, hidden, destroyed by later generations who wanted to erase evidence of how belief had been twisted into machinery. But its legacy endured, not in metal, but in memory. The Inquisition justified its use as a path to truth, a ritual of purification, a necessary violence to protect society. Yet every turn of the screw damaged far more than bone. It reshaped culture. It carved fear into families across Europe. It taught communities that accusation was more powerful than innocence, that silence could be fatal, that truth was not something you lived, but something you survived. And for women, especially, it became a warning passed through generations. Do not stand out. Do not speak too boldly. Do not attract suspicion. The world did not need proof to destroy you, only a story. Even after the Inquisition faded, the psychology remained. Societies continued to punish women who stepped outside prescribed roles. Laws changed, but suspicion stayed. Institutions modernized, but power still sought ways to control the vulnerable. The head crusher became less a device and more a metaphor, an emblem of how systems can collapse a person from the inside out. Today, the idea of hearing one's own skull crack under pressure seems unimaginable, but the mechanisms of coercion, fear, and forced confession still exist, just in different forms. History's cruelty evolves, but it never truly disappears. That is why remembering matters. Because forgetting is easy, forgetting is comfortable, but forgetting is how these machines are built again, in new ways, with new names. The head crusher remains a warning. When institutions claim they alone hold the truth, when fear becomes policy, when confession becomes currency, humanity's darkest machines do not need to be forged. They simply return. And so the question remains, as we close this investigation, if the past could tighten a screw until a woman's eyes were forced from her skull, what might the future do if we stop paying attention? Subscribe and join us for the next descent into the archive.